evening of the 4th of October 1957, the US President, Dwight D. Eisenhower, was confident that he led the world's greatest nation. In the USA, the early 1950s are known as the Eisenhower years. Many Americans remember these years as a time of wealth and happiness. The USA was the richest nation in the world, and it was growing richer all the time. Almost every American could hope to own a house and a car. As a general, Eisenhower had led US armed forces to victory in the Second World War, and until that evening in 1957, it seemed that no other nation could threaten the USA. But then some news arrived that shook America's belief in itself. The Russians are in space! The Russians are in space! Until this moment, Americans believed that their nation was the most powerful on Earth. But now the Soviet Union had gone beyond the Earth. Millions of radios all over the world could hear a new broadcast. Beep, beep, beep. This electronic noise was the sound of the satellite Sputnik 1, the first object placed in space by humans. It was a Russian achievement, and it shocked Americans. This was the time of the Cold War. The Soviet Union was America's great enemy, and soldiers from both sides stood ready to fight in almost every part of the world. The risk of real fighting, a hot war, was always present. But the Cold War was not just about armies and weapons. It was also a war of technology and ideas. Each side presented its successes in science and technology as proof that its political system was better. So when the Soviet Union sent its little silver satellite up into the cold night sky of the Kazakh Republic, it was more than just an interesting scientific test. It was an act that showed the world that the Soviet Union was winning the war of ideas. Sputnik measured just 58 centimeters across, but every 96 minutes it crossed the skies of the USA like a new moon, a Russian moon. Americans were worried. If the Russians could put a satellite into space, what else could they do? Soon they might send platforms into space as well, and drop bombs from them right into the heart of the nation. Newspapers were soon filled with wild stories about the new dangers in space. Many Americans believed them. What are we going to do about this? President Eisenhower asked his Secretary of Defense, Neil McElroy. There's no real reason to worry, McElroy replied. Sputnik is not a danger for us. Our scientists are better than their scientists. I know that, said the President. That's not what I'm worried about. My problem is that I don't like surprises. I don't want to be surprised like this again. The nation doesn't want to be surprised like this again. In future, we will make sure that we are ahead of the Russians in all important technologies. What are you suggesting, Mr. President? We need a new department of government to direct our high technology work. I want to be able to say to the American people, don't worry, the best scientists in the world are working for the US government, and they're keeping us ahead of the Russians. And I want to stop the armed forces competing with each other the way they do now. It's a waste of money and talent. I want a single organization to control all our high-technology efforts. Yes, sir, Mr. President, said McElroy. The Secretary of Defense did not know it, but as he turned and walked out of the famous Oval Office, he was taking the first steps on a road that led to the most important invention of the late 20th century, the Internet. Chapter 2. The First Computer Network. On the 7th of January 1958, President Eisenhower announced a new organization called ARPA that would control all of the government's high-technology work. Soon ARPA was spending millions of dollars on research into new science and technology. In lonely laboratories deep in the deserts and mountains of the USA, brilliant men and women explored extraordinary new ideas. Scientists built bombs that could spread terrible diseases. Engineers made plans for wars in space. Psychologists tried to train people to communicate through the power of thought alone. ARPA's earliest projects were aimed at winning the space race that Sputnik had started. But these projects were soon placed under the control of a new organization, NASA. NASA captured America's imagination all through the 1960s, especially after President Kennedy announced his plan to land a man on the moon. While NASA filled the news, ARPA was working quietly in an area that would eventually prove far more important than space travel: computing. In 1966, the man in charge of ARPA's computer projects was Bob Taylor. He began his career as a scientist working on brain research, but he was also interested in computing even before computer science existed as a separate area of study. Computers were still a very new technology at this time. They were less common than Rolls-Royce cars and more expensive. In the 1960s, a computer with the power of the machines that sit on desks today cost millions of dollars and was the size of an apartment. Most of these machines were owned by universities, the government, or large companies. They were mainly used for mathematics. But even at this time, Bob Taylor realized that computers were not just machines that could calculate. They were machines that could communicate as well. ARPA was paying for computer projects at universities all over the USA, but Bob Taylor was not happy with the results. He went to see his boss, Charlie Hertzfeldt. "Charlie, we've got a problem," he said. "What's that?" Hertzfeldt asked. "We're throwing money away," said Taylor. "We're paying different people all over the USA to do exactly the same work." "What's wrong with them?" shouted Hertzfeldt, who had a strong Austrian accent and frightened many of the people who worked for him. "Haven't they heard of the telephone? Don't they go to conferences? We pay for them to go to conferences. Why don't they just tell each other what they're doing?" "No, Charlie, that's not the problem," explained Taylor. "Of course our people talk to each other. The trouble is that their computers don't." "Their computers don't talk? What do you mean?" asked Hertzfeldt. "Well, look at my office. I've got connections there to all of our biggest computers. But if I want to communicate with the people at Santa Monica, I have to sit down at one machine. And if I want to talk to the computer at Berkeley, I have to get up from that machine and go over and sit at another one, using a completely different computer language. It's the same for all the other computers." "So, what's the answer then?" asked Hertzfeldt. "I want to build a network of computers. I'd like to connect 4 of our biggest computers together. Then the scientists can share their research, and we won't be paying for the same jobs again and again." Hertzfeldt looked at Taylor for a moment. "Isn't that going to be difficult?" he asked. "Oh no," said Taylor, sounding more confident than he felt. "We already know how to do it." Hertzfeldt thought for a moment. "Great idea, Bob," he said. "Start working on it. I'll give you $1 million right now. Go." Taylor left Hertzfeldt's office and went back to his own room. $1 million, he said to himself, and that only took 20 minutes. Why didn't I ask for more? When Bob Taylor had the money for a network, he began to hire people to build it. His first choice for a manager of the project was Larry Roberts. Roberts was perfect for the job because he was an expert in both computers and communications. He had just succeeded in linking 2 computers on opposite coasts of the USA. Bob Taylor had paid for this work, and now he wanted Larry Roberts to go to work at ARPA. The problem was that Roberts did not want to come. He was happy where he was, Lincoln Laboratory at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Taylor went to see Charlie Hertzfeldt again. Isn't it true that ARPA is giving Lincoln at least 51% of its money? Yes, it is, said Hertzfeld. Would you speak to Larry's boss and make sure he remembers who pays his wages? So Charlie Hertzfeld called Roberts's boss at Lincoln. We control more than half of your money, said Hertzfeld. So it would be good for Larry Roberts and good for Lincoln Laboratory if Roberts came to ARPA. Why don't you send him down here as fast as you can? The boss of Lincoln Laboratory quickly called Larry Roberts into his office. It would probably be a good thing for all of us if you would take this job. They won't accept no for an answer. 2 weeks later, Larry Roberts was at ARPA. Bob Taylor gave Larry Roberts the job of finding computers for the new network. ARPA wanted to use some of the computers that it paid for at universities around the USA, but the people who controlled these machines were not enthusiastic. We've got our own work to do, they said. Computer time is too valuable to waste on crazy ideas. Others were more worried about security. The information on these computers is secret, they told Larry Roberts. If my computer starts talking to your computer tomorrow, it'll be talking to the whole of the Soviet Union by the end of the week. None of the scientists seemed to trust anyone who was not at their own university. I don't want any fools from University X to touch my $1 million computer, they said. But all of them seemed quite happy to think that they might get their hands on other people's computers. Larry Roberts went for help to Bob Taylor. Taylor simply used the same methods of persuasion that he had used to get Larry Roberts to ARPA. He phoned each of the universities and said, "Who pays for your computer?" "You do," they replied. "Then you're going to join this network," said Bob Taylor. So ARPA got the computers for its network, which Taylor had decided to call the ARPANET. But it was 1966, and no one in the world really knew how to build a network. Larry Roberts began to make plans. He had the money and he had permission to join together 4 big computers. But the really important questions about the design of the network had no answers yet. Bob Taylor held a conference for ARPA's computer researchers at Ann Arbor, Michigan in early 1967. This was Larry Roberts's chance to describe his plans and hear the opinions of the best computer scientists in the USA. At first, they were not enthusiastic. Roberts said that he planned to join the computers together directly with telephone lines. This meant that the host computers would do 2 jobs, the work they already did and the extra work of controlling the new network. Most of the audience hated this idea. Our computers have too much work already. They can't do another job, they said. Anyway, this network won't work. Every computer in the system will need to understand how to talk to every other computer. There are just too many different types of computer, and they all use different languages. This was a very good point, and Larry Roberts did not have an answer to it. Even if you could link 2 computers together on a phone line, it would be very hard for them to understand each other. It would be like French and Indian people trying to communicate in Swahili. Just before the meeting ended, someone handed a note to Larry Roberts. "You've got the network inside out," it said. The note was written by Wes Clark. He was one of the least enthusiastic members of Larry Roberts's audience. He was bored by the meeting, and he had already told Roberts that he did not want to be part of the network. He was working on computers for individual users, and he did not want to share them. Maybe this was why he saw a way to build a network that did not force the host computers to do more work. After the conference was over, Larry Roberts found Wes Clark and asked him, "What did you mean when you said, 'You've got the network inside out'?" "I've got a plane to catch," said Clark. "Can we talk in the taxi?" So Wes Clark and Larry Roberts continued their discussion on the way to the airport. Clark described his idea. Forget about sending a message from one computer to another directly. It'll never work. The host computers have got enough to do already, right? Well, yes, Roberts agreed. But we need them to do this networking for us. It will help everyone in the end. Yes, I know all that, said Clark. But you don't need to make them do the extra work of translating between all the different computer languages as well. But how can we avoid it? Roberts asked. Why don't you design a system that uses other computers as translators? Then messages will always go through one of these translators before they go on to their destination. How would that work? You can leave the hosts as they are if you put a smaller computer between each of them and the phone lines. The small computers will all speak the same language, but each small computer only needs to learn just one new language to speak to its host computer, and the little computers will run the network. They'll do all the work of checking the messages and sending them on, not the hosts. Leave the hosts as they are. Build an inner network of small computers and everything will be fine. It's obvious. That's brilliant, said Larry Roberts. He climbed out of the taxi with the seed of a new plan for the network growing in his mind. Wes Clark's ideas solved several problems. Obviously, it meant less work for the host computers and for the people who controlled them. It also meant that each host computer would only have to learn one new language to speak to the smaller computers, and it gave ARPA better control of the whole network. When Larry Roberts got back to Washington, he wrote a new plan for the ARPANET, including Wes Clark's ideas. He called the new, smaller computers IMPs. These IMPs would be the interface between the different host computers. In other words, they would allow two systems to meet and talk to each other. The design of the ARPANET was becoming clearer, but Larry Roberts still didn't know exactly how the IMPs should speak to each other. Roberts explained his latest ideas at another conference. This meeting was held at Gatlinburg, Tennessee, at the end of 1967. Roberts talked about the ARPANET, the host computers, and the inner network of IMPs that would help the hosts to communicate. But he did not say much about how this communication would work. That was still not clear. At the same meeting, there was another talk by Roger Scantlebury from the National Physical Laboratory in England. He spoke about how to build a packet-switched network. To Larry Roberts, packet switching sounded perfect for the ARPANET. Packet switching is a very efficient way to send data electronically. Each message is broken down into pieces, or packets. The packets are then sent out into the communications network. There is no need for the packets to travel together or in any particular order. Each packet is free to find the best route to its destination. When all the packets have arrived, they are put back together again to form the original message. There is nearly always more than one route to any destination through a network. If there are 10 routes from A to B, it will be quicker to break a message into 10 parts and send them all at the same time than to send the whole message along a single path. Packet switching also takes advantage of the fact that the data used by nearly all computers is digital. This means that the original information, sounds or pictures, for example, is translated into a system of numbers. Digital information is very easy to copy. It can easily be broken down into packets and put back together again without losing any data.